This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Right now, I am coming to you from the middle of Chaosville. This week's episode is a little bit off schedule because I've got this sweet bungalow, this little house that was built in 1919 here in Minneapolis. And at the beginning of the summer, I took advantage of this home energy audit that the city was offering. And like 3 people were in here for 2 hours, maybe more. They did blower tests, all kinds of crazy stuff, and then gave me this big detailed report and said, your home is woefully under-insulated, which is to say it's uninsulated. My home was built in 1919, so full of charm, adorable, but without insulation. They didn't do that back then, unless they stuffed newspaper in behind the lath and plaster. So a contractor came and filled my walls with insulation, did the attic, did the rim joists. It was amazing. But now all around the perimeter walls, so every room in my house, every 16 inches, there are these 4-inch wide holes that have been, filled. But I need to wash the rooms, sand the filler, and paint over all of it. So I've just been painting my office, which is a huge chore, a ton of trim. And yeah, my computer, my desktop, which is where I have my editing software for the podcast, was in its original box downstairs, tucked underneath a couch, behind a bunch of other stuff. It is kind of crazy, but today I got the computer out, I'm sitting down, and I am so excited to bring you this week's episode with Paulette Stout. You'll get her full intro as part of the episode, but I just wanted to say we are talking about using senses in our writing, bringing those sensory details to life for the reader through our scenes and in our narrative description. Kathryn and I had so much fun talking with Paulette. I think you're going to love her and enjoy this episode so much. She is also one of the co-hosts with Lainey Cameron of the Best of Book Marketing podcast, so make sure you check that out. And then quickly, I wanted to make sure you know that I have a few spots available in my fall coaching groups, quarterly or year-long, for fiction writers, also memoirists. Check it out. Schedule a discovery call with me. We will have a conversation and see if group coaching is a good fit for you and your writing goals. All right, without further ado, from the middle of Chaos Land, here's our conversation with Paulette Stout. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Kathryn and I are delighted to be joined by Paulette Stout. Paulette is the 17-time award-winning author of fast-paced and spicy contemporary women's fiction that tackles social issues often ignored. Her stories feature brave characters finding their voices and transforming into their best selves. Paulette is also the co-host of the Best of Book Marketing podcast and works by day as the director of brand marketing at a global software company. Her 4th novel, What We Give Away, releases next February. Paulette, welcome to the Roundtable. I'm so glad you're able to join us today.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited for what you have in store today.
Thank you. And we are going to talk about senses and using senses through our narratives to build our characters, build our worlds. But before we get into the topic, tell us about your current novel, which is your 3rd one, What the Eyes Can't See.
Yes, What Eyes Can't See is its book three in my Bold Journey series, but all my books are standalone stories. So you can pick up and stop wherever you want. And this one is near and dear to my heart because it touches on something I feel really passionate about. And it's about kind of like representation in fiction. I had a side character, Barbara Washington, in my other books, but it felt like she needed her own story. And it also helped, kind of bring forward what I like to do, which is to have diverse characters and stories in my story. She is a an affluent Black woman, New York City. All my books are set in New York City. We'll talk about that today for settings. But it touches on the issue of race and class from two different directions. It's got an affluent Black character who, a lot of times when I see Black characters, especially in women's fiction, they're kind of on the brink of destitution and impoverishment. And, I'm like, well, we're all the rich Black folks that I grew up seeing around New York City. So I felt like this was a character that I needed to bring to the page. I'm really happy to have done that. I worked with sensitivity readers for over a year, Black women who would talk about their backgrounds and their stories. I did a lot of research, lots of drafts because I wanted to be true to their experience. I'm a woman of color, but I'm not Black, and it's not the same thing. So I wanted to make sure that their voices are represented on the page. So I was really excited. It's yummy and spicy, and it makes you think and it makes you feel. So I'm really excited by the response it's getting.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what is What Eyes Can't See about, and how do senses factor into the story or your writing process?
Yeah, I mean, what I can see the idea of it is it's the character that you have inside. It's when you look at someone from the outside, you might see someone from a particular background. And in my case, I had a Black heroine. You don't know the lives they've led, you don't know the struggles they've gone through, and you can't look at someone. A character is something the eyes can't see. And that's kind of the central bit of this. I have a male protagonist in the book who comes from a system involved background, grew up in extreme poverty, was in juvenile hall or whatever. And he rose to get, overcome those things and become a lawyer himself. And they end up in the same place. And, although she's been groomed for this particular very senior role, they give it to him. And it's just interesting is that you can do all the right things in life, especially as a person of color, and still not achieve because you're perceived that that's not a role you should have. So you have this, white character who's from a very disadvantaged background, and he leapfrogged the woman who had all the advantages, went all to schools, did all the things, and she was still coming up short. So it's kind of juxtaposing, kind of race and class and belonging and where do you fit in? She's navigating a lot of white spaces and never feeling like she belongs. And he kind of feels the same way as a white man from a very disadvantaged background. People see him and they see a white guy and they don't know that he was in a gang and he was in jail and all these things. You think someone looking at them from the outside. So that's the kind of central kind of theme around What Eyes Can't See.
Yeah, such important subjects for everybody today. And I love that you're bringing class into the conversation as well as race and looking at that intersection.
For sure, because for me, I was raised by a single dad and, we didn't have a lot. There was times in my life I shared a bed with someone, so it was like, you just don't know when you look at someone what they've gone through. So, and I think that's something that, we're talking about settings and senses. I think growing up in New York City, that really shaped the approach that I bring to writing, because New York is like a sensory explosion. When I live in Massachusetts now, and when I go to the city to visit family, I'm just like, oh my God, it's just sights and sounds and smells and tastes, and it's all everything 24/7, and it's a lot. And that's something that I try to bring to the page because I want people to feel like they are in New York City and they are walking in this character's life. And senses is a huge piece of that. In the setting of New York City, sometimes people talk about New York being a character in my book almost because the setting is so vivid and the characters are navigating these spaces in the way they do. And I know that not everyone writes the same way, but when I write, I see the scenes, I see the people navigating the world. I know not everyone does, creates in the same way, but when I create, that's what I do. So I kind of try to bring as much as I can the five senses forward into the setting so that characters can just feel like they're living in that world and forget that they're reading.
Yeah. So, okay, this brings up my first question for you, which is how do you create a setting like that with so much going on? You called it an explosion, right? And get those sensory sensory inputs translated into words on the page without it becoming overwhelming for the reader or bogging down the pacing of the story.
It's an amazing question, and it's something that I find that especially beginning writers or people who are still trying to find their voice struggle with a bit, because they think that in order for the reader to feel grounded in a space, you need to have a schematic of the room. You need to know every single, light and wallpaper color and carpet and every single thing. And that's just not the case, because I think what sometimes people forget is that everything you put on the page should be there for a reason. So, and that applies to settings. Settings should be a way for you to learn about the character or learn about the story. And you should only include room details that are relevant for that character. What does that character notice? What memories do those elements in the room trigger something? Do they see a smelly pair of boots by the front door that reminds them of their Uncle Jack from Thanksgiving and how much they hated going? Now you don't only learn about the room if there's a pair of boots by the door, but you learn about the character's history. You learn about the Uncle Jack and what's going on with Uncle Jack and why doesn't she like Uncle Jack? So it should be there for a reason. I see Kathryn laughing. So
Yes, we have preached the multi-purpose description. We are on board. Yes,
definitely.
Go.
Fall means back to school, and even if you haven't been a student for ages, it is the perfect time to grab a pencil and hone your storycraft skills. I've got new workshops and group coaching sessions open for enrollment now at wordessential.com.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think that people, they sometimes don't know what to choose, so then what is relevant for that scene. And if you think about the scene you're crafting, what is the purpose of the scene? What is the little story arc that's happening in that scene? And then how could the setting and the sentence play into all of that? What mood are they in? Are they hungry? Are they in a restaurant so that when the little platter of shrimp comes sizzling by with like a little vapor of steam, crawling the finger, is that what they're focusing on? Are they focusing on the person at the bar that looks like their boss and he's drinking a glass of scotch that's kind of reflecting off the dim lighting? Are they focusing on the votive candles that are flickering in the room and wishing that they were going to have a date for Valentine's Day that was the next week? It's like all those different things. How can the setting and what they notice tell you something about the character and who they are in that moment?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think so many writers, especially newer writers, focus on our sense of sight. And I noticed you were just mentioning like the shrimp going by, and there's smell and a sizzle and there's sound, and of course, so many things. So when you're writing a scene, do you let just your instincts shape what's on the page as you're in that kind of flow state writing, or are you consciously thinking about what you just described? Like, what is my character noticing? Why is it important? Which sense am I going to bring into this moment?
The latter a bit. Yeah. And I think that there, I did a little analysis preparing for today for chapter 1 of my book, What Eyes Can't See. And I did a sensory report because I use Pro Writing Aid, and Pro Writing Aid has sensory reports. So, if, according, from some of that data, I have sights, I have, sounds, and textures, and then there's, flavors and things mixed in. And, it kind of depends also on the setting. Does the specific setting bring a sense forward? Does, if someone is on a beach, does the briny air and the rolling sound of the waves crashing, the crunch of the shells underfoot, what does the setting that you have that scene in, it's going to elevate certain senses ahead of others. So, just, play into that. And that will also help your reader pay attention to certain aspects of the character. One thing just to quickly keep in mind, not to do a little soliloquy here, but one thing that I think is important that I've doing research for today also is each of us as a writer and a creator has a sense that we tend to favor. So knowing that will, and kind of how to counterbalance that. So bring, maybe dialing back some senses and bringing back, or will help you relate to more readers, because readers have a sense that they intrinsically connect with more. And if you're not aligning from a sensory level with your readers, they may or may not connect with your work as much as they could if you just made a little bit more effort to kind of dial up a few of the senses that aren't your natural favorites.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you said about the setting helping us to choose our senses. Like if you're on the beach, what would you notice if you were actually there? And the seashells crunching underfoot. I think anybody can expect to hear waves, but depending on what beach you're on, where in the country or where in the world, you may or may not, have those kinds of seashells. I remember I was in the East Coast once, and this parking lot outside a restaurant was like paved with broken seashells. And it was astounding. I'm like, how could there be that many seashells that they can use it for paving? You don't get that in the Midwest, right? Yeah. So what if you're in a setting that's common to your character and to your book, like your character's living room or kitchen or bedroom or something that's going to appear multiple times throughout the book, and we don't want the senses to get tired. We don't want to keep using our favorites and such. And of course, our characters are so used to what's there, they're going to tune out a lot of sensory input. So then how do we shape our scenes in those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the beginning, there is going to be a little bit of setting the stage, but you don't want to overdo it. You want to ground, characters, so readers, so they know where they are. They're like floating loose in this white box. They turn the page and it's a white box. So you need to put them someplace. So help them like understand what time of day it is, potentially what time of year is the character, what's the setting, are they alone, are they with people? So all those kinds of things, so they don't feel untethered, and when you start off, you're going to, give, certain aspects of the room, and hopefully, like we talked about, it'll also be, revealing of the character. And then in other scenes, you can reveal other parts of the room. You can potentially connect, how does that room connect to another room? What is the lighting like? How, if it's daytime, at nighttime, they're going to notice different things. They're going to, if it's daytime when you start, the next time they're in the room in the evening, there may be a lamp in the room that's casting a warm glow onto the carpet where, her daughter had the blob of gum that she left there thinking she's going to get it later and go back for it. So, so there's things that they'll notice about the room. If they're in a bathroom and if there's dust bunnies in the corner, it's like of hair, there'll be ways for you to bring different aspects of the setting forward, depending on the action of that theme. If a mother's feeling bad about her housekeeping skills, or a dad is feeling bad about his housekeeping skills, or a non-gendered person, sorry, I'm being very gendered right now. But if if they're feeling bad about their housekeeping skills, they're going to notice different things because of the mood they're in, and they want to either affirm their negative self-talk, and those can be things that you pull out of the setting to kind of reinforce the character's mindset in that moment.
Yeah, and then that interplay furthers not only setting, but also character in that moment in the scene. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, oh, there's a coffee ring on the table. There's 9 coffee rings from all the coffee they drink because they stay up too late and they're insomniac, coffee rings and like piles of tissues if they're sick all the time and they're just kind of accumulating on the bed and they just don't want to touch them afterwards. That's telling you that they are a little bit of a germaphobe. They don't want to touch the dirty tissues afterwards. There's all these little things that it's not just the setting itself, it's how the character is engaging with the setting around them.
Yeah. So, question for anybody. Can you think of a time when you've struggled with the sense you want to put in the scene? Like either you're having trouble deciding what sense to put in it, or you know what you want to put in, but you're struggling to find the right description, or it's something like the seashell walking across a seashell parking lot and you don't really quite have a grasp on that experience, but it's just right for the. So when have either of you struggled with getting that sense on the page?
Is there something you want to jump in with, Kathryn?
I will, because I think you will probably have a little bit of insight in this, actually. I have struggled with getting the cacophony and the overwhelm on the page. My kids have this great picture book that is actually for like neurodivergent kids that have like sensory overload. And it's a great picture book because all the things jump out and kind of overwhelm the space. But it's like hard to do that with just words and not with pictures on the page, where you can get the sound of the reading, as you're doing it out loud to the kids, and also just the overwhelm of the colors and the textures on the page. So I have a character who has never lived in a city who is now in a city. And I wanted to capture that, like she walks downtown at night for the first time. And I really struggled. I had to rewrite that scene a number of times to try to capture that chaos of not just seeing, but being kind of overwhelmed in all of her senses, And you talked about doing New York City. I was like, oh, she knows what I'm talking about.
Yes. And it's funny because there are, and then there's also an aspect of being unexpected. So you might expect in a city that it's going to be constant chaos at all moments, but it's not the case in every spot. So there are moments where you are walking down the street and there are puddles of streetlight, around you, and you hear the rustle of like a garbage bag that's kind of floating on the sidewalk. And then you hear, some honks in the background, but your footsteps are echoing off the sidewalk because you're the only one on the block at that moment. So I think that there's sounds and smells, and then you can say, oh, is it August? August smells like horrible in New York City. So are the trash piling up? Is there a rat kind of nibbling on something in a corner of the trash bags that are laying out because it's August and it's like rat and water bug season, So there are some of those things can help you in the book. My character is affluent and she moves to a very disadvantaged neighborhood. So she is, walking by and there's a homeless person sitting in their own union, kind of swaying with a bag, and she's just kind of like, and there's blobs of gum that are just like smashed onto the pavement. You find that a lot in New York City where it's just so old that it's not even sticky anymore. And it's just like become part of the pavement. So there's like little things like that, the tacking, and I was like thinking of examples, you could have, a character who walks into a bar and the floor is sticky and it reminds her of, when she was assaulted at a frat party in a basement. So the sticky, tacky sensation of the floor can be like triggering of a memory for that particular character. So it doesn't always have to be about the setting itself. It can be about what are the experiences the character is bringing to the setting.
Yeah. And I feel like you've said that like almost every time you've talked about descriptions, you're actually talking about the character's memory of. So I like that because it brings it back to what's actually important in this story, which is the character's experience of it, not actually what it is.
Right.
How they're experiencing it.
So I'll give you an example. In my book, like in New York City, people eat out alone a lot. It is very common to eat alone. I know that's not as common potentially in other places. So for me, it was important for my character to just go out to dinner by herself, sit in a really beautiful space and have some wine and just watch what's going on around her. And I'm an art fan. So there's art in the restaurants. A lot of times we'll have local artists and they'll have paintings and they'll be for sale. So she's not only thinking about the space and but she's talking about the art on the walls and how there's a chaotic nature of what's going on at the family table. And there's like, I don't know, I think I put a peacock under the table and someone's like feeding the peacock. It's kind of like this like chaotic family scene. And, she's thinking on her own family because, her mother had passed, her brother's elsewhere, and she's kind of estranged from her father. So it's like, the environment and the setting and, the crackling of the bread as she snaps it, and the steam of the garlic as it comes, all those things can help advance the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so much depends too on the character's emotional state in the moment and responding to it. Like thinking of Kathryn's problem of communicating overwhelm to the reader, you're going to have to layer in the descriptions of the setting to get that sense of it coming at you from all sides, and do it in such a way that you maintain clarity for the reader. But then also, if as that setting description is coming at us, we're in touch with the character's response to it, which is panicky, which is, anxious, which is whatever communicates that overwhelm, maybe a feeling of a need to escape, to get somewhere quiet, to find that street corner where it's just you and your footsteps, right?
Exactly, because it's not just the chaos of the moment, but it's how it's impacting the character. So in my first book, Lovely Better, I have a moment where she's gone out, she's in this office, and she goes in the street, and it's sunny, and it's lunchtime, and there's everybody around, and there's like traffic and honking, and she was like in her mind thinking about something, and then a truck rattles by with like the flaps breezing in her face, and then she just has to step back and go up against the building just to kind of collect herself. So there's stuff happening, but the character's reaction is so critical to their moment, because if that's someone who's seen that every day, they might do the middle finger to the truck and keep walking. They're not going to have the same reaction that your character who's never been there, and it'd be like, watch it, someone's yelling out of the truck because she just stepped into the street, and it's just too much. So it's the reaction to the environment probably that will get the chaos going that you're trying to convey, almost more so than what's happening around her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've talked about sight, sound, and touch. What about, so you said backing up against the wall, or sight, sound, and smell. Yeah. So backing up against the wall reminded me of touch, right? You get her up against that hard wall, and maybe she feels the grittiness of bricks through her shirt or
the coolness
something.
Of the stone through her back because it was a hot day, and she just,
Yeah.
Yeah. Temperature is very good too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember in my first draft of, I think my first book, I remember I had a character, or the second book, my character kind of leaned into the fridge, and like the cool blast, prickled his skin to attention. It's just the cool blast. My editor was like, ooh, nice moment. I just remember that one particular, but that was a temperature one. So I do use temperature. Also if someone's really hot, is the clothing sticking to their skin? Are they, kind of fanning their shirt away from their blouse to get some separation and some air movement? And, are they just running and their skin is, it's, hot and cold and temperature are good, and tactile sensations. If something's rough or something's spool or something's sticky, or, something is smooth, and all those types of great things. And if you're here, I mentioned earlier before we started, we have the Thesaurus of the Senses, y'all. So I think it's Linda Hart. So if you're familiar with the, the emotional thesaurus or other books like that, this one is for the senses. So it's got like seeing, but different levels of seeing. It has, smell and touch and scent, and there are more for some senses than others because they're more commonly used. Sight is a very important one, so there's lots of different sight ones. But if you're stuck on a word and you want to bring some dynamism to your writing, that's a nice resource.
Yeah, thank you for that. Favorite sense to write, either of you?
I love smell. I really love smell. I mean, like sight is, it's easy, but in terms of what gets me kind of excited to think about crafting, smell for me. Smell and taste a little bit. I have like the book on my work in progress coming out. One of the characters is a chef. So there's going to be some smells and tastes and.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So why smell? What about writing and crafting smell does it?
I love to cook. food is a big part of my life and my culture and how I engage with my family and how I celebrate. And I always feel like there's a joyous and a mystery and a it's a pleasurable experience. So trying to convey what that is to others so that they can enjoy that too is just brings me a little happy joy, puts me in a happy place. But I do want to be mindful. Another thing of smell, there are cliche smells.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, and I'm sure for other senses are the same thing. I enjoy reading romance books, and almost all the men smell like sandalwood. So just
Really?
be mindful, just be mindful of your senses. And are you using one that like everybody uses? And if you're using a familiar, scent or smell or sense of some kind, what's an unusual way that you can describe that?
Mm-hmm.
If you in your first draft want to write a cliche, go write a cliche. But when you go back through and edit, what is the more meaningful way that you can express that sense that connects to the character's experience?
Mm-hmm.
Kathryn's laughing again. I'm making this woman laugh like all the time.
I'm like, she hates the smell of sandalwood. She throws it all away.
No, I mean, I did it in my What We Ever Say. I got, he was an Indian American man, so sandalwood felt like it met. And then after my book came out, I was reading, I'm like, every single guy smelled like sandalwood. And I was just like, I can't even with the sandalwood anymore. So y'all be on top of your sandalwood and choose something else.
Enough with the sandalwood.
Enough with the sandalwood. Everyone's got sandalwood.
Funny. So. I was going to say leather and soap, right? Men always smell like soap and leather, but apparently that's passe and now it's sandalwood.
No,
you're living in the
go
past,
for the leather.
I know. Yes, I always do. I'm stuck in the past. My husband
eats peanuts all the time, so even like he smells like the peanuts and he's always munching and he's like throwing the shells everywhere. You can make it something else. Just be careful of the sandalwood. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Well, and make it something specific to your character. Like what does your character do? What is your character around? Why might that smell cling to your character's clothing or hair or breath, if it's eating peanuts or
right. If they work in a bakery, they smell like yeast. If your friend your character, Kathryn, who unfortunately found themselves in New York City, maybe they were sad. They go back to their hotel room and they open their suitcase and their shirt smells like pine and they just wish they were home. They just were the pigeons are dirty and there's too many rats. It smells like cockroach, just like they want the pine back, or they came from a beach and it smells like salt and sea and, so it can be really a powerful moment, going back to what, you said, Alida, about mood,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, I find it harder to describe smells, I think, than other things. So years ago, I read a brief little essay or article or something. This woman was born without a sense of smell. And so she was always asking people what things smell like. And everybody described one smell in relation to another smell. This thing smells like that thing smells, and didn't help her. And she describes being on her first date with the man she wound up marrying. And they were having wine and he smelled the wine. And she asked him what it smelled like. And he said, when you put a grape in your mouth and the skin has that kind of dusty feel against your tongue, and then you bite into it and it floods your mouth with juice. And she fell in love with him in that moment. Right? I'm like, that is such a great story. That has always stayed with me. And I'm like, man, how do you describe a smell? So it's not just like he smelled like that smelled, or, this thing smelled like the other thing smelled. It's such an interesting puzzle to think about.
Smell also like one of the closest tied to like memory and things. And so I feel like everyone smells differently. Right? Like we all
do. And it's tied to your taste as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's fun to mix metaphors or similes or whatever. If you say that something tastes like sunshine, or something smells like sunshine, or something that's evocative of a feeling, then you can kind of move it out of that this and that metaphor within the same set. If you kind of mix in something else that gives you the emotion of the moment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like using the sense of hearing because it's so easily misinterpreted.
Say more.
You can hear something and think it's one thing and then go check it out and it's something completely different. And I love using that kind of as like misdirection or to pique my character's curiosity so they go check something out, or maybe to create this like atmosphere that you don't get in other ways, because hearing is so easily like maybe it came from over there but actually it came from over there, or it was really just your neighbor starting their car, or whatever.
And I think it's also nice to use the senses to kind of give a sense of like time of day as well. So like, if things are more quiet in the morning or in the evening, and like in the book, I'm in a rural setting for the first time. Everyone's like, are you going to put something in place the city? And I'm like, yeah, I'll be in Pennsylvania. Don't worry. So it's like, so there's like crickets, and then there's frogs chirping, and then there's gravel crunching underfoot when they're walking up the walk, and there's prickles of cut grass and underfoot, and the coolness, so there's I think different places, like we talked about, had different settings, but the time of day can like also help you kind of heighten the senses of what are you hearing now, because the other things are more muted.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you're clearly very in touch with writing the senses, incorporating that into your narrative. And I'm sure not every writer is. I think for some writers, it feels like a chore, like, oh, I need to put a sense in this scene. Oh, okay. What is that sound over there? So do your readers notice this? Do you get notes in your reviews, or have people say, oh, are they aware of how evocative
I think so.
are?
Yeah. I get a lot of feedback that I forgot I was reading,
cool.
Which is like, make mama happy. It just makes me so proud if I can make someone forget they were reading. People feel like they're navigating the spaces. They are the character. They're living in their, they're inhabiting their world and their bodies, and they just forget that they're reading. So I love that too. And I think that in certain moments, like I write, open door intimacy in my books, because I feel I use those intimate moments as a way to also express character, because I think that it's a powerful tool for bonding and for showing the status of a relationship, and how free they are with each other when they are intimate, or what they're thinking, and then changing point of views for whose mind are you in for that scene. Because I feel like sometimes people shy away from writing intimate scenes because they are so afraid of this, the mechanics of intimacy.
Right.
When intimacy is really about, what are you feeling? Like, what are the characters feeling? And how does the other character make that character feel? So you don't have to do, like I said, insert Y into X and move, you don't have to go to that depth of detail. It's all about the emotional experience between the two characters, and the senses is really huge, and that's where you can mix a lot of the metaphors about, taste and texture and scent, and, the business of arousal and all those things. So that's, the senses is really huge there. So I definitely feel like having that sensory experience definitely makes people, feel invested in the story. And I think that it also makes them read it faster, because they want to stay in that world and they want to be with those people.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm like, ooh, do we go there? But that could be a whole episode on its own, is, getting into the intimate moments and communicating something meaningful instead of something mechanical, and then the role of senses in that process.
I love what you just said, meaningful, not mechanical. Like,
yes,
put that on a t-shirt. I wear that t-shirt.
Amen. Right? Yes. Yeah. No kidding. All right. So thoughts I mean, okay, I'm fumbling here because I'm like, do we go there or do we just like make that its whole
I'll
own
go wherever
episode?
you want to go, baby doll.
Yeah. Do we have time? Do you want to talk about senses and the intimate scenes? Yeah.
That's something that we struggle to talk about because neither Alida or I have really delved into writing that. So, like, I mean, a little bit Alida, but you say it's not your favorite thing, right?
No. I mean, we did an episode on writing sex scenes, and I've got a craft tip on writing sex scenes, and I have written some sex scenes. I don't know. You know, I wouldn't say like, oh, they're amazing. No, we don't write. I don't write romance. I don't, but my contemporary fiction has some intimacy in it. But I certainly would not say that's my bag or I'm an expert at it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. But yeah, we have talked about it. So, all right. Well, let's go there. Let's see what happens. And maybe we'll have to do a part 2 and have you back for a whole episode on intimacy. Yeah. So since we're talking about senses today, how do you incorporate senses effectively into those intimate moments while avoiding the mechanical?
Right. So I think I think that there are certain ones that present themselves as more important in those types of scenes. So it's touch and the result of the touch, so it's not only the actual touching, it's how does the touch impact the person being touched? So that, that there's like a resonance there of how the touch is. And it's not just that they are being touched, but they're being touched by that particular person who that they are emotionally invested in, and that's in the scene if the partners kind of know each other. If you're writing a scene where they don't really know each other, obviously it's a little different. So I'm kind of talking about a scene where, you have two characters that are invested in each other. So it's kind of the release of the expectations and the anticipation of the touch. So like there's the before the touch happens, there's during the touch, and there's after the touch. So there's different aspects of one specific sense of being touched and touching. So the anticipation of it is also like a piece of that, of building that dramatic tension for those scenes. Yeah. And then smell also very important, in terms of how that smell is impacting the other person or making that person aroused or like heightening their experience, with smells, and then the resonance of the sensation, and for me, my first book is about a woman's bedroom experience, because I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to get the tingles when I was younger. And I went through a lot of hoops to figure out how to get the tingles. So my whole first book is about how to find the tingles. So all the things that I went through to find it. So for me, I find that it's important, but it's also going back to character. Sorry, Kathryn. It's also about how those people relate to each other. So in my first 2 books, I have one couple. It's Kyle and Rebecca. They're very sensitive. They're very intimate. In this book, I have Rebecca. I have Barbara and Sebastian. They are aggressive people in their life. They are more extroverted, and they make love in a more aggressive way. They will like smash each other against walls. They will, kind of the pace of the intimacy is faster. So then you're touching faster, you're moving things, you're touching, you're groping, you're wanting things faster and more deeply. And then some of the words I described that with may be more aggressive and less nurturing than you might have with like another couple who were a little bit more softer personalities, more introverted, they are more tender, so it's the character plays a big role in the types of senses and the types of experiences that you create for those characters in those intimate moments.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes. I was writing a scene. I'd written Rebecca and Kyle for so long that when I wrote the first scene for Barbara and Sebastian, I'm like, no, this is not them. Like they would never make love in this way. Like this is too nice, like they need to be a little rougher or whatever, because it didn't match their characterization.
Yeah. There's so much in that to unpack. And I just want to invite listeners to really think about everything you just said, because the scene isn't just about the physical act of being intimate with somebody else. It's about the characters, their personalities, their relationship, where the relationship is at on this particular moment in time when they're being intimate. And I love what you said about how the first time you wrote a scene for these new characters, you had to stop and revise because it wasn't like your old characters and such. And I think one of the reasons writing sex scenes is so challenging is because we live in a culture that loves for us to be inhibited, right? And we all have our set of experiences and our hang-ups and our whatever we grew up with around these things. And then we've got to go and draw on our own experiences as we do when we write anything, but write characters who are not us and who might behave in ways completely out of our personal comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's not just
100%.
like, oh, armchair research, I can find out what it's like to walk on all those seashells, right? It's it's a little different when we're having characters, get naked together. It makes us feel naked as we're writing, like emotionally naked, vulnerably naked.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is also creating a distinction between who is you and who is the character.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in my first book, there was some dissonance happening in terms of the characterization. And, my editor was like, Rebecca wouldn't do that. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what I did when it happened. And it's like, well, she's not you. And then that was just like a revelation for me. She's not me. Your character is not you. You can put them wherever you want. You can do whatever they want. And you can just pretend. That's what we do. We make stuff up. So I think if you're a person who draws really heavily on your personal experiences as you write, that might be harder to detach. But I think that if you can, you will just feel this immense liberation because you are freed from the confines of reality when you are crafting these scenes, because they are not real. The characters are not real. They are not you. You can do whatever you want. And if they want to be intimate with an octopus floating on the ceiling, like, you can do that. You can make it however you want. If you want to have mixed gender parts around, go ahead. Like, you can do that, so, and that's, and then when you're with people in their own fantasy life, just like a little digression, you can do all of that. It's anything is possible with intimacy. It's all about what the character wants and needs. And it's also in that moment, you could have a moment where one character who has always puts themselves last receives pleasure from their partner and does nothing. The character makes them do nothing and just receive. And that's a very powerful moment of like characterization where they are allowing themselves that moment, and then they are allowing themselves the other partner to give them. So there's a lot that can happen. And that's why I know a lot of women's fiction does not have intimacy in it. And I get, people get some kind of way with like me putting intimacy in women's fiction, but so it's kind of ends up straddling more women's fiction and romance. But I just feel like it's such a powerful tool to build character and advance relationships. And, not for nothing, it took me forever to figure it out. So I'm going there, honey. So that's important for me. And I put that in. So I'm just adding the spice back into women's fiction. I'm trying.
Good.
All good. Yeah. Well, and I feel like you said, it reveals character, it reveals emotion, it reveals where they are in their relationship. It again, this is not like a single purpose just for the reader to go, ooh, this is for the book. This is for their relationship.
Right.
It's amazing you said that, Kathryn, because I just finished a book recently. It was called Ugly Love and by Colleen Hoover. And it was so repetitive because the characters had a non-relationship. So the sex didn't really do anything to advance the story. It was just like a transaction. And after a while, frankly, I started skipping them because like, I've been there already. What are you doing for me that's new as a reader? And so you have to be mindful of how you are using your intimate scenes and what are they doing for you? Because after a while, it's just like watching a Marvel movie where like 900 people are getting killed. And it's like, okay, you could have stopped after the first 30. Like, I got it. They can kill people. I got it. So it's a little bit like that. Why are you using it? Really being intentional about how every single word in that book and every single scene needs to be on purpose and for a reason. And if it's not, how does it need to be there?
Right. Right, definitely. And I think that's the difference between erotica and any other genre of fiction. You know, if you're writing erotica, then its purpose is to titillate the reader, and that's it. And then it can be mechanical, or it can be sensational, and it can be repetitive. But if you're writing any other sort of story with an arc, with characters, with plot, with world building, then the sex scenes are there in service to the larger narrative, just like everything else in the story is there in service to the larger narrative. You know, and I think if you're writing a story with multiple bedroom moments, then the job, as you were just alluding to, Paulette, is to make each one novel in its own way so that there is not a repetition, but a continuation of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And my editor has like a way that she likes to craft the intimacies. They all need to be doing something. They have to be different. Like there should be some dissonance happening between the characters. Like maybe there's some resistance on one side, there's some resistance on one side, and then it's like at the end, like they're both fully present at the same time. So I don't follow that 100% because
right.
I have different reasons. And for me, also, you should be thoughtful about the plausibility of the scenario. So, for instance, if you have two people that are together and have no reason not to be together, then making, like a cat jumps on them and they separate, and, it's like, if there's no reason for them not to be together, then sometimes I have a hard time of not putting them together, because as a reader, when it happens to me, the phone rings and whatever, it's like, oh, come on now, it just feels too implausible. So I like, for when things happen in the story, there should be a reason that they happen that way. And if they don't have a reason, then just have it happen and see where it goes, because people can get together and they'll be like, oh no, we made a mistake. And you can always like separate them really easily. But if they're in a moment and they're not touching and it feels artificial, like two normal people in that situation would have like kissed, then just have them kiss. It just feels like keeping them artificially apart to me just gets annoying. It's like, don't have them together, have them together, but make up your damn mind because you're driving me crazy.
Definitely. Yes. Yeah. I mean, if it is an advancing character, plot, theme, or ideally two of those three, then why have it in there?
Preach.
Right? Right? Raise the breath.
Preach.
So what else do we want to say? Is there anything else we want to touch on in this fabulous conversation about senses, character, setting, and we're even touching on the narrative arc as a whole? What else? Anything?
I think there's one thing we want to talk about, which was settings you've never been to. So, if you've never been there, if you have an opportunity to travel, then that's great. If not, just peeking at similar settings in your local community that you can maybe have the same sights and sounds and smells, and you can get like a simulation of what it feels like to be in that space, like that's somewhere local to you. That's another way. Or, looking at videos and lines and movies and things like that. It's another way to do it. Or, seeing how someone else handled a similar setting in another book. So just really quick, just a few ideas.
Yes. Yeah. Love that. And I've certainly used all of those in my research process. And then it's to add the senses into those settings. It's that process of imagination, right? And you use the word simulation, like thinking about what we do have experience with and what we can use to recreate or create. Yeah.
I like that you said that, like, you find a place that's similar and think about, what smells and things you're doing. You could even like pick 3 or 4 places that can, individually all add up together to be whatever that thing is, so that you could focus on, okay, what does this place smell like? And what does this place sound like? And what is, so that way you can create a whole imaginary world around that. That's cool.
I love that. It's a great idea. I love that.
Definitely. Well, Paulette, thank you so much for joining us at the round table. This has been fantastic. We are going to have your links in your bio at storyworkspodcast.com. So if anyone, is driving and can't take notes quickly, just go to the usual place for the show notes. But where can people find you?
Best place is PauletteStout.com. You can find everything there about my work and my coaching and my events and where I'll be in person if you happen to be any place close. I am very active on social media at Paulette Stout Author. Most of the platforms have that exact same handle, Paulette Stout Author, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And I'm on X at Stout Content, but I'm not there a whole lot. But there you go.
Excellent.
Also, yeah, and my books are everywhere. You can buy books. I'm on Kindle Unlimited. You can get them at libraries. I have audio, print, and ebook for all my work, so you can enjoy books however you choose.
Amazing. And I just want to add that you are co-host of the Best of Book Marketing podcast with Lainey Cameron, who has also been on this show. And I was just listening to your episode on marketing after the book launch, and I want to say thank you. Fabulous, full of incredible content. Welcome. Yes, so everybody should check out Best of Book Marketing podcast as well to get more of Paulette's wisdom. So.
Yeah, and the good thing about that is we tape live I think it's the second Friday of the month. Check our website. But if you listen live on Facebook or YouTube, you can chat us live questions and we'll answer you right then. Otherwise, you can just listen later on whatever podcast platforms you enjoy.
My newsletter, A Room Full of Books and Pencils, is growing every week with new reflections, writing tips, and transcripts of the podcast. It's also where I make announcements about things like upcoming writing workshops and coaching sessions. Check out A Room Full of Books and Pencils at booksandpencils.substack.com. Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.